everybody, and welcome to another session of the Wednesday Web Chat. I'm Chandran, the editor, publisher of stormasia.com, and we'll be looking at a few issues around the topic of patriotism, since it's National Day, month of National Day, the flags are flying. People may not be going out in droves because of the COVID situation, but we are still celebrating it in our own way. So what we're doing today is we're looking at what patriotism means to us. And I've got today on the panel 4 people from different industries. Some you will know straight away, others you may not know of, but they all sort of represent different age groups and different sectors of society. So I'll just introduce them to you and then we will get on with the session. So we have Chandran V R, who's the managing director of Cosmopolitan Real Estate. Chandran was in the army, and after that, he entered the real estate industry. We have Danielle Hong. She's an associate with Quantum Consumer Solutions. Danielle is currently a culture researcher in a consumer research agency. We have Maxine Avasadanond. She's a first-year law student at University College of London. Prior to studying law, she was a Raffles Girls secondary school student, where she was a member of the Red Cross. And of course, we have Prof. Jeremy Monteiro, the jazz musician. He's a director of his own company, Showtime Productions, and he is such a hardworking musician and entrepreneur. What does patriotism mean to each of you? Very quickly, if you can just go through.
In my opinion, patriotism is doing our best for not only ourselves, but also society as a whole, regardless of people, where they come from. And I think patriotism is also taking care of the environment.
It's a more global sort of thing, yeah?
I think simplistically, you can say that patriotism, for me, feels like love and respect for the country. It really depends on how you feel the social contract is between your citizenship. What your promise is that you made with the country. So I think for me, quite like Chandran, I don't think it's just me and the nation, but it's also me and the community or the groups of people that I care about. So not just family, but also community.
Patriotism isn't just about believing in a certain ideology or political party or even the history of the country. It's more of loyalty to the country and devotion.
I think it's for me, it's love for country and also for fellow Singaporeans, people that you live with on a national level, as well as Danielle correctly said, I think also the community. But the thing is that patriotism very often is mistaken for nationalism, which is not necessarily a good thing. So I think, but patriotism is very useful. I think the sense of belongingness and the sense of ownership that we have for the country is all comes together to form, for me, the feeling of and actions of patriotism.
Do you find that at certain times people tend to be a bit more patriotic than others? Like now, for instance, National Day is a time when the fervor sort of rises a bit more. And at other times, does patriotism factor in your life?
I don't feel it comes up during National Day. I think it feels when you're overseas and then suddenly being Singaporean is I am Singaporean, what do you mean? I think when we hear someone else talking in Singlish, then suddenly that sense of patriotism, it's like a beep beep in your head.
Yeah, I suppose, during the particular festive seasons, whether it's Christmas or whatever, you hear Christmas songs, then you tend to feel more Christmassy. And then I said during National Day, when we see all the flags and hear the songs and all that, I think we, even during Chinese New Year, we hear the Chinese New Year songs, we feel our Chinese New Year mood, So I think it's become like a real seasonal feeling that where there is a surge of patriotism, you're reminded. And I have a feeling that now during COVID as well, to see how Singaporeans have really banded together and we realize our common destiny a little bit more during this time of difficulty. Struggles and difficulty always brings us closer together as a people, right? So I think definitely that as well.
I think the other time when patriotism tends to come up a fair bit is when we are successful, like Joseph Schooling winning gold at the Olympics. I think everybody sort of felt very proud to be a Singaporean. and also like the time when we were playing the Malaysia Cup, right? And we would win the Malaysia Cup. That was another reason for this upsurge of patriotism. But do we need things like that? Do we need constant bright moments as a nation to keep the spirit of patriotism and belonging lit and going?
I personally have evolved. I've just turned 50 years old in June. When I was 20 years old and when I joined the army, I actually volunteered for an elite unit. And I thought that was patriotism. While there, I loved every moment of it. Today, after being in business for almost 30 years, my outlook for patriotism is, when we talk to clients who are coming to find a home or find an office, and we contribute differently to the growth of the economy as well as the society. But I think it goes beyond waving flags and things like that, especially now, looking at the situation. I think our frontliners are as patriotic as anybody who's out there.
I think that patriotism that isn't necessarily about like the big events and all that, more of like a sense of like community. So when you share experiences with other people, especially like Daniel said, like overseas, you definitely feel that kind of feeling of like, oh, we have similar experiences, we're from the same place, that kind of thing.
In any successful relationship, whether it's between one person to another, it's a very nice and well-balanced blend of unconditional love and conditional love, right? You can say that, all you need for a relationship or friendship to thrive is unconditional love. And of course, you cannot say that if it's only about, conditional love or transactional, it'll work. So it's this blend. I think, combination of, we feel that we are being taken care as a people, as a nation, and individually, and as well as we are doing our part as well to do what we need to do to serve the country. I often personify Singapore, and I really feel a lot of love for Singapore on a personification basis as well.
So when you personify Singapore, what exactly do you envision?
Like a really good old friend that I've known all my life, really, and sometimes it annoys me. Sometimes I annoy it. When I say something, maybe, sometimes in public, I've learned not to do that now anyway. But the poet Rumi used to love to personify when, he used to, like, for example, personify the divine as a lover. And similarly, this friendship, that I have in Singapore, and this relationship, where I have love for the country and the country loves me, not just necessarily the government, but just people in general and civil society. I think this is what creates my inclination to create this personification, and therefore have this wonderful relationship that can be translated for me as patriotism.
So that means we all probably have mental images of Singapore that we relate to, right? So what's yours, Danielle?
Actually, I was just going to ask Jeremy, because I found his good old friend kind of personification quite interesting. And I was wondering, when was the closest that you ever felt to this old friend? And when was the furthest you've ever felt?
I guess when I was younger, in my teens and 20s, I'm always grumbling about this or that or other. And I remember having a lunch with a senior executive of SPC, now called MediaCorp, and I started grumbling about country, about government, and then he just said one thing to me. He said, "Yes, but is that fair comment?" And
it's in your book as well.
Yeah, it's in my book. And actually, I stopped talking the whole rest of the lunch. And for 1 week, I was very silent, because I realized that how powerful our words are. And then, we can't just shoot. Or if we want to say something or criticize something. So I guess that was at the time that I went from feeling, the most distant with the country, having come out of the army not a few years earlier, and starting my life restarting my life as a musician. But I feel that as I've been feeling very, very close to the country for a long time now. I mean, having been involved in writing national and campaign songs, and also music director in the first 3 national songs, stand up for Singapore and so on and so forth. I mean, you can't really not feel the love for country when you work on that kind of thing, because you're trying to invoke and evoke those kind of emotions from your listeners. So if you yourself don't feel it, people can tell you're fake straight away. They know you don't mean it.
Do you feel they were successful in that intent, Jeremy?
I think for a large part of it, largely, I mean, we people make fun of the song, like one people, one nation, one Singapore. There's a meme going around saying it's one pimple, one lotion, one single pore. and people make fun of it. And Mr. Brown and Mr. Miyagi have made fun of the same song this year, which is fun because, you get that, then you suddenly get SSO doing the one people, then you get, my latest official version. So, I mean, but writing the songs, I really feel that I get a chance to almost viscerally feel the patriotism for Singapore.
Do songs like that work for you, Chandran? Do you feel driven by it?
Like during National Day, and if you're there, you're taking the pledge, it does move you. The messages are clear. It's to unite the people.
There's a question. Regardless of the nation we were born in, don't you think we should be better off and stop behaving dysfunctionally toward each other? So does patriotism extend beyond just your boundaries, but into a global arena? Does this apply beyond Singapore?
But then I think the conversation goes into like a national identity, right? So
True.
Patriotism really is a social the nation is a social construct, and the kind of loyalty that we feel to it is based on like what we've been talking about, which is this sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging can be regional, especially like maybe for Maxine, if you have family in Thailand, then obviously it's a more regional thing. Or if you're like very mobile and you live in New York but you're Singaporean, then of course you're more global in perspective. But I think at the crux of it, we always have this sense of a national identity. It is dependent on what social groups you belong to. I mean, your family will always, if your family is still in Singapore, then that tie will always be there.
So your roots play a part, you're saying?
Yeah, I think very much so for a lot of us. Yeah.
Okay. So Maxine, in your case, where are your roots? Because you've lived in so many places, you've lived many years here as well.
I don't think my roots are specifically like to a certain like physical place, like Singapore or Thailand, because I think your relationship to the country and your connection to like the culture and the people and the community is like changing all the time, and it's about which like part of your life is at which like stage, kind of. Like in Thailand it'll be like childhood, family, but Singapore is like growing up and friends. And so I can't say like, oh, my roots is in Singapore or Thailand or in China, where like I was originally from.
With your generation, is there a sense you get from interacting with them about what they feel patriotism is?
With the internet and social media and globalization and all that, patriotism, like I said, is not like towards like a certain place, but more of a community and a feeling of like, okay, this is where I belong. And that can change from like person to person based on their own experiences.
Chandran, how about you? I mean, you were in the army, quite entrenched in that. You were full-time, right?
Yes, I was full-time. As I mentioned, I volunteered in a unit which most of them would not want to be. Why? Because it's actually the toughest unit within the army. And I was crazy enough to volunteer because at 7 years old, I saw my uncle wearing the red beret. And I told myself, I want to have that. And then I volunteered, I joined them, spent a couple of years. When I was there, that was probably the most patriotic thing I did. The roots, the comradeship that I gained was very unconditional friendship, relationship that I treasure till today.
As you grow older, as you start becoming a bit more entrenched in society, in business, as you become more successful, do you feel a feeling of belonging? Does that feeling of belonging grow as you become more successful?
I personally think for myself, it grows. Even though I share with my children, be a Singaporean, but be a global don't just be a Singapore citizen, but be a global citizen. What we do here affects not just Singapore, but the planet. And in that context, based on my experience and based on what I've seen, I actually treasure the roots that I have here because we really have a very unique country. Basic safety, security, clean water are issues in many countries. So based on that track, I treasure that. And at the same time, we just got to be interconnected regionally as well as internationally and globally. So today, yes, be Singaporean, but I think it's also important to be a global citizen.
Danielle, when you were working with the MVPC, did you have to interact a lot with the needy families and those who didn't have enough?
So I think it's interesting to also talk about those communities in respect to patriotism, because there are a lot of people who do fall through the cracks. And in that sense, I think it's good to also broaden up the conversation to then what is our sense of obligation and duty to those that don't have as much as the average Singaporean.
Do they feel a link between their plight and patriotism, or do they keep the two distinct from each other?
As in, do they feel, what is their sense of patriotism towards Singapore?
That's right, yeah.
I don't think that specifically came up, but if you did ask them, I think the sense is that they are grateful for the rights that they have as Singaporeans, but I do feel that in some sense, they also felt that they have fallen through the cracks, like someone's not looking out for them. As to who that someone is, of course, it's contextual, but so I think it's not a simple answer for them.
Earlier on, Dom Melly also made a comment, and far for me to disagree with George Bernard Shaw, but I think what he was talking about there in describing patriotism, to me, he was describing nationalism. Now nationalism, there's a very benign way of actually, we all feel nationalism as well. And I think sports actually, when we have two football games, when we have a football game with two opposing countries, I think we feel more our nationalism than our patriotism there. And actually, and that's a very harmless, benign way of experiencing nationalism. Of course, it can get out of hand, as you know. There's been violence at stadiums between two opposing country fans. So that's where it starts to get dangerous, because this is the thing that will then, for me, nationalism is actually one of the things that creates propensity for conflict within countries. And patriotism is not like that. I think patriotism, in my view, is really just a feeling of belongingness, ownership, and a feeling of that we are part of a community, we are part of a shared vision. I think both our feelings of patriotism, firstly, our feelings of patriotism are going to be really tested in the next couple of years, because as far as COVID is concerned, I'm actually the ever optimist, but I really believe we are only at the end of the beginning of this whole thing, and that the economic pain that we're going to feel, and people who will be suffering and not be able to properly, adequately look after their families, and also countries being very protective. Vietnam not selling us rice is not really patriotism or protectionism so much as they only have enough rice for their own people. But countries stopping to sell us vegetables and so on and so forth is one of the first signs that are appearing, that where people are going to look after their own before they look after anyone else in the world. Globalization is in retrograde, and it's actually retreating around the world. So rather than advancing, because of the protectionists and also a lot of right-wing governments appearing around the world. So actually globalization is under threat. China, of all countries, is actually the one pushing globalization forward, So I think, I don't know what the rest of my friends here feel, but I think globalization is actually under threat.
Yeah, I do agree with Jeremy. I think that we see, Trump himself, Trump calls himself a nationalist, so you can pretty much interpret it like that. But the move I see Singapore making is towards a more regional approach. I think there's like a lot less talk about like wanting to be on a global stage, especially when the global stage is very uncertain. But I think we are talking a lot more about building better bonds with our ASEAN neighbors, for example.
I think nationalism is really very dangerous. I first realized this when I had a chance to speak with a magistrate in Germany, a guy by the name of Willy Brandt, not to be mistaken with the former chancellor, and who actually said that it was nationalism that gave rise to Nazism, and also started gave birth to Hitler and gave birth to the Second World War. So it's a dangerous thing. Nationalism has to be really worried about. Whereas patriotism, I think you can be as patriotic as you want towards your country, and it doesn't preclude you from having love for other countries. Like I lived in 4 months out of the year in Thailand in the 2000s, right? So I have a very close affinity with Thailand and Thai people, and I have most of my relatives, 95% of my family is in Malaysia. So I have, a really close affiliation and a feeling for Malaysia as well. Plus, when we travel, Danielle was talking about how when you hear Singlish, Malaysians speak Manglish, which is like Singlish, right? And we tend to band together. Suddenly we become one country again in terms of our behavior,
What is Singapore? What is patriotism here? We've been taught to recite a pledge that I personally think it has kept the peace, harmony, and stability among us. Of course, as any country, any nation, there are challenges, there are crises, but those pledges that we took is what is keeping us together.
Danielle, in your generation, do you get that sense of belonging? When you say the pledge, do you feel connected with the country, or do you just say the pledge because it was something you were taught in school and therefore you just say it, you know what to say, you say it?
I think there's something to be said about performative patriotism. There are certain things that create the myth of being a Singaporean, and the pledge is one of it. We learned it in Malay, and that was very awe-inspiring for us because most of the Chinese kids didn't understand what the Malay words meant, but it sounded grand. And that whole idea of like putting your hand over your heart, it kind of added to that dynamic performance of it. I think somewhere down the lines, as we got older, we kind of realized what it actually meant in relation to our own lives. So, I mean, in terms of performing patriotism, I think these things play a part in helping us to understand our national identity.
So Maxine, when you have to make a decision about which country you're going to choose, what part of patriotism play in that? Or is it more a very practical decision about where it's best for you?
I don't want to share what I'm going to decide, but I think I understand Singapore's stance on like national security and like conflict of interest and all of that. I feel like it's pretty disingenuous because like choosing one passport over another is kind of like choosing loyalty between two different countries. And I think especially for me, it's pretty disingenuous to say that, I'm gonna choose this one instead of the other one.
There are many people who say they would die for the country. Could you, in your own ways, explain what that means to you, and would you die for your country?
Well, I take the question, or Jeremy, are you taking that?
Chandran, you should go first.
All of you should.
We will answer, but I think Chandran, you as a military person,
Yeah.
You had asked me this question about 20 years back. Being in a unit where you're expected to be on standby 24 hours a day. If they press the button and you got to go, you got to go. And if you have to lay your life down, you can do it because your team, your comrades, and everybody is depending on you. I mean, I would volunteer myself again to go through this if I need to defend it. So why is because of the love of the comrades, the love of the family, and love of the friends who are here. And this is ours, right? So if we don't defend it, who's going to defend it? So this is a ship. It's a ship where we've got passengers and we've got crew and we've got captains. So I consider myself as a crew member.
We've also got generals, but never mind, carry on.
and I will do my best.
My interpretation would be, would I love my country if it didn't love me back? So I think that's like kind of my baseline for like the worst case scenario. I think so, but I do think that that sense of belonging will always be there, even if that worst case scenario happens.
I don't know if I'll die for the country like physically, but maybe metaphorically. I don't know.
How do you die metaphorically?
I don't know. But
it could be cancelled.
Oh yeah.
Could be a good way to dodge
Just
a
die
bullet.
Yeah.
Maybe you're too young to be talking about
Yeah,
dying.
I don't
live your
think
life
I have
first.
the life experience or like enough of a stake in like the wider community, not just like family or like school, that kind of thing, to like actually understand what it really is. So I think I'll find out when I'm older.
Well, for me, I think I'm a very peaceful person, but the fact of the matter is that if ever, for example, my home got attacked by idiots who want to harm my family, I would become a warrior. I would want to repel the people who are attacking my home. And if, let's say, there are invaders that are attacking my HDB block, I will definitely, with my neighbors, will take every kind of broomstick or whatever it is to repel those. And if you just keep on extrapolating to the wider township that we live in, to the country, I think that at a point where you stop being a musician and you become a warrior that has to pick up arms to repel people who are coming to harm your family and friends and your nation. So in that situation, I would put myself in harm's way to protect the country, and I would die for my country.
Physical manifestations that you would prepare for. But you can also have economic stuff, which you don't see your enemy, but you will certainly feel the effects of it. And that could lead to situations where you might be without resources. You might not have enough to keep yourself going, keep your community going, but who do you take it out on? There's no physical invader to fight, but you could still die as a result of it. So maybe sometimes it's, you got to play with the cards that you have. To understand what's the best approach, what's the best for yourself, for your country, for the community that you're with, and see where you can take the road, which road is the best one to get onto, and find a way forward for everybody. So Chandran, Maxine, Jeremy, Danielle, thank you so much for being in this session. It was not the easiest of topics to discuss, so you're all very brave to jump in and have your say, and I appreciate that, and thank you very much. Thank you to the audience as well, and for the questions that came through. Hope we managed to answer some of them at least. Thanks again for being on this Wednesday web chat, and look forward to the next one next week. Thanks.